Well, Dawn, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Oh my goodness, I'm just delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course, this is actually round two for us. You came on the podcast. I want to say it was like 2 or 3 years ago because it was prior to the Beverly Hills She Recovers event.
Oh, then that was in 2018, so it must have been like
Oh,
a
four
long
years ago.
time ago.
Don't ask me to do math this early in the morning, but it was a while ago. Yes, well, I'm super excited to have you back. I figured we'll start at the beginning. We'll talk a little bit about your story, but I have a little game I like to play in the beginning. It's just a few questions to front load the episode with some
Fun,
resources.
fun, fun.
Um, when you first got sober, you got sober what year?
1987.
1987. So at that time, there was not a lot of sobriety literature. But when you first got sober, were there some books that really helped you in the beginning?
Well, I got clean and sober in a 12-step program called Narcotics Anonymous. And really, it was just that literature. That's all that I knew that was available. There were some other non kind of recovery related books that I was reading at the time or shortly thereafter. John Bradshaw's, now
Oh yeah.
I'll forget the name of the book, but um, it was a book about, he kind of introduced this concept in a pop culture sort of way around our inner children. So
Oh,
that was really kind of, I remember that being kind of one of the first books on my recovery book pile. Now I have rooms of recovery book piles, but John Bradshaw's work was pretty foundational.
Yeah, I remember, excuse me, I remember hearing this idea about the family as a baby mobile in the sense that, the baby mobiles that hang over, it's like it's on an axis and then there's little things dangling down. He talked about like in recovery, like one person starts to heal and change, they start moving. And that's like if you tap on one of the objects on a baby mobile, the rest start to move to maintain balance.
Yeah.
Right. And I thought that was so interesting because you get into recovery, start to change, and the whole family starts to change too.
Oh, absolutely. The book was called The Homecoming, Reclaiming and
Ah,
Healing Your Inner Child. And it wasn't, so it was a few years into my recovery, but again, I mean, it's over 30 years ago, so I'm just trying to kind of pull things out.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I
No,
mean, we change it. I always say addiction runs in families and it impacts
yeah,
everybody. So when recovery is happening in a family, how is it not going to affect everybody?
exactly. Yeah. So the 12-step literature was there an NA book at that time?
Oh, definitely. The basic
There was.
text.
Okay,
Yes.
so I know that there was like the big book, the Alcoholics Anonymous book, and then NA was sort of a,
Yeah, I think we were even on our like fourth edition by then.
oh
If I,
wow.
yeah, no,
Okay.
yeah. NA's been around since the 50s,
The 50s. Okay, so shortly after
20
AA
years
was
after, I think, right?
20 years after. Okay. Very good. I mean, I love books. I'm obsessed. I have a couple of piles
Oh my
always.
gosh. I get handfuls every week arrive at
Yeah.
my house.
So are people
It's
sending you books?
both.
Yeah.
Both people send and I purchase. One of the things that I really like to do is support women who have, because I've written a book recently, so I like to support other women who have written recovery related books.
Yeah.
So I always buy them. I
Yeah,
always
me
buy
too.
one book. I'm privileged enough to be able to do that. I mean, I couldn't go out and support people who are selling cars or houses, but I can usually buy a
Books
book.
we can do. Yeah, we'll
Books,
definitely talk about your book. I have it sitting right here.
yeah. I just feel like it's a grassroots thing I can do to support other female authors in recovery.
Absolutely. Yeah. I speak to mostly authors and coaches or professionals, doctors now. And they send me books. So I have stacks of amazing books. And the thing is I can really only digest like maybe a book a month.
Mhm.
Right. So I will do a lot of audiobooks, but it's it's a lot of, it's not just absorbing it, but it's
Yeah.
applying what you're learning.
I do grad student guts is what we used to call it, where like, you have to read a book. Like for my PhD, I had to read 200 books. I didn't read 200 books. I gutted them, right? I read the introduction, I read the table of contents, I read the introduction, I read the conclusion, and I flip through the body of the book to see if anything jumps out at me. And that's how I've been reading a lot of these many, many books. And then, I'll look at one and go, wow, I want to read this word for word when I have time.
Yeah. Yeah. I will often get the audiobook first. And if it grips me enough, I will buy the physical book too.
I haven't got into that 21st century audiobook thing, or I guess it was around the 20th century. I really just got a Kindle not too many years ago. So
Yeah.
yeah.
The thing about the audiobooks is I have a busy body. I need to be moving.
Right.
So I will have and I have a busy mind. So it edges out the chatter.
It's great. I'm going to try it one
Sometimes.
day. I'm just not there yet.
Yeah, it's super good. You'll like it. Well, you could always listen to it on YouTube for free. So anyway, okay. So books. We love books. What did you get your PhD in?
Healthcare policy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a heavy duty one.
Yeah, I'd really looked a lot at the time. I was looking at care of the dying was the topic, kind of the theme that I was interested in, which was very interesting because I chose that PhD topic, and then my mother was diagnosed terminal. So I kind of got to be learning about policy related to end of life care, and with a particular focus on caregiving, like who cares for the dying women, and where do they do it? And it's kind of looked at how it used to be at home, and then it went to the hospital, and then it was coming home again, those types of things. So it was really fascinating intellectually to be learning and kind of consuming all of this knowledge at the same time that I was literally holding my mother's hand as she was dying, kind of through a 16-month period of terminal illness. So it was one of those God shots, as some of us call things like that, where, I think if I hadn't been introducing myself to the topic of end of life care, I don't know that I could have shown up for my mom the way I did.
It's beautiful. That's what I would call a spiritual experience for sure.
It really was. Yeah.
Yeah. Those serendipity moments.
Yeah.
Love
Not that my mom got cancer. That wasn't a God shot.
No,
The fact that I happened to be looking at care of the dying was
yeah.
helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I found, after my own experience with my mom, I found that there were many beautiful lessons that I never would have signed up for.
Yeah, for sure.
But, we respond how the best we can. I think it's so interesting how a lot of us have like reoccurring quotes or mantras that seem to continually serve us. Obviously, one day at a time is something that is important to me. How does that particular saying play out in your life?
Oh my gosh. Well, it was the foundation of my recovery,
Wow.
right? That I could do anything 1 minute, 1 hour, one day at a time. And so I embraced that. I couldn't, in my early recovery, I couldn't really fathom a life without substances, like not forever, but I could do it in that day. And so I use it all the time, even just today when I suffer from anxiety, and I have anxiety when I have the thing that gives me the most anxiety is my schedule. So Monday mornings, I open up and I look and I go, okay, what have I got today? And I look at the week and I get anxiety because I'm overscheduled this week. And I have to just go, okay, well, I'm just going to get through today. And then I also, tonight is all mine. Tonight, like, is literally all mine. My husband actually just got on an airplane. He's gone for 3 nights. I have the whole house, my entire space just to me. So today I'll be okay. I've got these big things going on, including that I had like a 7 a.m. meeting. I've got our board meeting. I have another meeting, and then I have another work session. So it's a full day, but I can get through it today. Right now, the fact that I don't want to look at tomorrow is actually quite free. I don't have a lot scheduled. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is crazy. But yeah, I'll just do it one day at a time this week. And today will be a lot, but I'll get through it. And tomorrow will be lighter, and I'll get through it and enjoy it. And then, again, back to the busy kind of full, I try not to say busy, but the full out day on Wednesday. But yeah, I love one day at a time. I think it's a tool. I mean, it's a slogan, it's a saying, it's an idea, but it's a tool. And those of us who are in recovery and are familiar with it, I think most people will tell you, right? that it's been an amazingly important part of our recovery.
Yeah, it's a funny little, for me, like in the recovery sense of like in the beginning when I was trying to quit drinking, it was, or quit anything that really had a grip on me. It was this way of reminding myself to just be right here, right now.
Yeah.
Right. And it was like, I don't, and it's a funny little mind game that we play with ourselves. Like, the idea really is where I don't want to drink forever. Like I never want to drink like ever again. Right. But
Yeah.
I just say, well, just not today.
Yeah.
And it's
Well, and then we get to a place like now I would say like, I don't think I'll ever use substances ever again. I don't have to do that one day at a time.
yeah,
That
right. Yeah. Yeah.
I can make bigger and broader and wider and bolder decisions about. But yeah, I mean, this
Yeah.
morning I said I wasn't going to eat chocolate chip cookies because one is too many and 1,000 never enough. And I just had 2 chocolate chip cookies. So it didn't work today. And that's okay. And it's not because I judge chocolate chip cookies to be bad. It's just because like literally I'll go back to that chocolate chip cookie bag probably after this call and maybe again after that. I have a little bit.
Well,
It is.
what we're talking about is like that sort of river of anxiety that sort of just is in the background all the time. And things like a busy schedule or a full schedule, as you put it, that
Yeah.
gives me anxiety. Like
Yeah.
I literally stress out if I have more than 3 things on my calendar, even if one of them is like, go see a friend.
Right.
I'm like
Yeah.
this, I have to
It's
do
still a thing.
something.
Yeah. Introverts unite, right?
Were you always an introvert or did that change later in life?
I was, but I didn't know it. So I
Ah,
lived my life in a way where I was always extroverted. And that's why I was always anxious because I was not in my natural. I'm such an introvert. And yeah, like I look back and it explains a lot. It explains how anxiety drove me into substance use.
yeah,
It drove me into workaholism. It still delivers me into over shopping sometimes or the things. It's always anxiety for me. I can always trace it down to that. And a lot of that is because and then also I guess like introversion or extroversion almost sounds like a judgment in a way. I mean, it's an explanation for how we are.
yeah.
But I think what it doesn't take into account for me is that I am my very favorite person in the entire world to spend time with.
Mm,
So I just love time alone now. And that is different than when I could not stand to be in my own company because I loathed myself.
right.
So I think I even write about this in my book. I have this kind of developing sense of what is introversion versus extroversion and how do I fit with one or the other.
Yeah.
But definitely I am a person who prefers my own company over anybody else's. Like, and I need lots of time by myself. And
Yeah.
also I love people in my life and my family and spending time with them. But
Yeah, you do.
alone time is really, and they say that's what the marker kind of, right, is introverts. We get energy from being alone and extroverts get energy from being with others. So my energy is definitely, and my creativity, everything is sparked when I'm on my own.
I'm so glad you said that because I was going to mention that exact thing. It's just about energy, like
Yeah.
what fills your cup. And isn't it so interesting that we can live our whole lives like totally dissociated and not know like if we're introverted or extroverted because of how we were raised. Like how things started out sort of dictates what happens later.
Crazy.
Crazy,
Y'all should
crazy.
read that John Bradshaw book. No, I'm just kidding.
I know, right? The whole inner
The
child
inner
one.
child. That's this our inner child, like what happened to us as kids is the as much our DNA as the blood that runs through our bodies.
100%. Have you read that book, What Happened to You by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey?
I have it here. I can see it from where
So,
I'm sitting, but I
okay.
haven't cracked it yet.
I would highly recommend just cracking it open because there's some diagrams in there that make the point so clear that it's the childhood experiences that change and shape the way your neurons grow, how literally how your brain develops.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I love it that it's a slight turn on the phrase, like instead of what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
Dr. Gabor Mate, I think, kind of made that phrase famous, right? He says
did he?
when we look at people who are deeply addicted, we don't ask like what's wrong with them. We need to say what happened to them.
Yeah, not why the addiction, why the pain.
Why the pain?
Why the
Yes.
pain. Those are, yeah, that's, he wrote so many amazing books.
Yes.
I want to ask you about your self-care routine. And I
Mm.
recently was talking to someone that mentioned that they go on an annual retreat. We have our events that we go to. I'm super excited about Chicago. I'll see you there in person.
Yes.
What does your self-care practice look like, even if it's like a morning, daily, weekly? Do you like a weekly meeting schedule? What does that look like for you today?
Yeah, and I try and spend time alone in the morning. Oh, I don't try. I spend time alone in the morning. So I'll get up and I'll make my cup of tea or a latte, depending on what I'm into in that particular day. And a glass of water. I always start off with a glass of water. So I drink a full glass of water and then I'll start sipping on my tea or my coffee. And I will read from my daily meditation book. So I have a couple of readers. Right now, I'm mostly reading. The one that I've been reading for the last 10 years is Meditations for Women Who Do Too Much by Ann Wilson Schaaf.
Wow.
I love that. And these days I'm reading something from a little book called She Recovers Every Day, because I need to remind myself, but other people are always reaching out and saying, I love today's reading. And I'm like, oh, I should have read it. I know what you were talking about.
I've done
So
that
that's
to
my
you.
book, right? Yeah.
I,
So
I I messaged you the other day going, oh my God, today's really resonated.
well, and
I
it's
don't
so
remember.
fun because honestly, Arlena, I wake up and I go, I read my, like, this is for me, this is my meditations. And then not that my book isn't for me, but I'm like, oh, what are my people reading today? I'm interested. So that's been really fun since having the book in my hand to do that. I will make a decision early in the morning about whether I'm showering in the morning or later on in the day or in the evening or whatever. And so if I have a shower, well, I have a shower every day, but different times of the day, depending on my schedule. My shower is a big self-care thing. Like I use all the hot water and luxurious soaps. And I have, I always have a little bottle of essential oil. And so the last part of my shower is always a few drops of oil in my hands and then just kind of like letting them kind of take over the steam and the heat. So that's a piece of it. In nice weather, because I'm a fair weather walker, I'll get outside and go for a walk. And yeah, that's my morning kind of routine. My overall, I have some strategies for self-care that I try and embrace as often as I can. Yesterday, knowing again, today was busy. I had a pajama day. So
Yay.
pajama day is probably my biggest self-care. And a pajama day isn't just about what I'm wearing on my body. A pajama day, if I have my pajamas on, that means I'm not real serious about getting anything done today. So a pajama day will be, yesterday I finished a puzzle that I'd been working on for a while. I
Oh,
love
I saw
puzzling.
that.
Puzzling
Yeah.
is part of my self-care.
Yeah.
Love it. I just started it during the pandemic and I'm a little bit obsessed with puzzling. Yeah, naps, definitely. Sitting and reading a novel, watching, like tonight, my self-care will be catching up on Grey's Anatomy because I haven't watched it for, I don't think even since January. So they're all saved up there. Just really, yeah, it kind of varies, but there's generally a theme. And if I'm in my
Right.
pajamas, it's always a really great self-care day.
Yeah.
I also go on retreats, but I usually facilitate them. So
That's not a relaxing thing for you,
well, it
huh?
is now because I've done about 55 of them, so I've got it pretty down
Oof.
pat.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's the sense of responsibility is still there, even though I do embrace the relaxation elements and the massages and the swimming and the things that we're doing. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. That's amazing. Um, what do you do for fun these days?
play
Isn't
with
it?
grandbabies.
Oh, that's right. Of course.
Yeah, yeah.
So is your grandbaby close to you?
So I have some older grandkids who don't live close to us, but I have a 7-year-old granddaughter and a nearly 3-year-old grandson who live 2 blocks away. So they're
Nice.
pretty constant in our life. And then Taryn, co-founder of She Recovers, and my youngest daughter has a 3-month-old baby, Flynn. And they live about an hour from here, a
Oh, an
half an hour
hour.
drive and half an hour ferry ride. But it seems like he's only 3 months old, but we seem to be seeing him about every 2 weeks.
Oh, that's
So
nice.
that's
Yeah, I
pretty
didn't realize
special.
you had so many, but I knew you had
Yeah.
a brand new one.
Yeah. And that's the fun part. I mean, they're pretty delightful. I took my granddaughter to a play, took her to see Oz, a small
Nice.
town production of Oz last weekend. So that's my fun. And also hanging out with She Recovers women in our community.
Yeah.
We do book clubs, and we're going to start a knitting club, and
Oh,
that's my
yay.
fun. That's my fun stuff. And travel. I love to travel.
Yes,
I'm going to New York City with my sister in May.
that's right. That'll be lovely. Let's talk a little bit. I just want to qualify your story a little bit because we talked about it in the first one, but that was a while ago. And I think it's so interesting to talk about like what happened early childhood that set the stage for where we're at today. Can you tell me a little bit about
Mm.
your parents and your family growing up?
Yeah, my dad just passed away in October, and my mom died 23 years ago. And here's the thing, we ended up in a place in our lives where I loved them so deeply that sometimes talking about my childhood feels a little bit disloyal.
I
So I
know.
always have to kind of take a breath and think
Yeah.
about how I want to. My mom was raised in poverty, and her dad went off to war, and he went off a lovely man and came back a raging alcoholic, was violent to her mom. So my mom's thing was she wanted a family, and we weren't going to be poor, and there was going to be no violence. And my dad was raised in a less precarious situation, but not a lot of emotional support. So neither of them kind of were very developed emotionally.
Mhm.
And they both really just wanted to be providers for their family. Had 4 kids. We always had a lovely home, everything we needed, except, there wasn't much of an emotional connection either between us and our parents or between us as siblings, because they just didn't know how to facilitate that, right? So, children squabble, and we squabbled, and what squabbling meant was we got shut down. So we lived in a house where you weren't allowed to fight because that was loud and you couldn't make noise, but you weren't really allowed to be joyful either because that could also be really noisy. So I guess I just always look at my childhood as like living in a pressure cooker. And we were always waiting for, and it was never like, my dad never blew up. My mom, of course, wouldn't have allowed that, right? And he never got violent, but there was
Right.
always this simmering. So we grew up in like this simmering pressure cooker where, the lid is going like this the whole time,
Hmm.
like blah, 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 but nothing really ever blew up. Um,
So no relief or release from that tension.
no, so that's really kind of the main thing, I think. That and then also, like, we had a nice house, and we had a pool, and we had fun. And my dad did drink, and so I always say that when he drank, and he only drank like on Fridays and Saturdays, only ever. And when he drank, he loosened up. So what I saw as a kid was, and we could joke with him a little bit. I always say you could joke about my dad being bald on Friday night at 9 or Saturday at 7, but don't do it Sunday night, and don't do it during the week. He wasn't bald actually, but balding. And so I just saw this different guy on the weekends, right? When all my aunts and uncles and cousins would be around, we'd be out by the pool, and they were very, again, they'd have big adult parties, but there'd be dancing and lots of food and lots of alcohol, but the men would be in shirt dresses and ties, and the moms would be in long dresses. Like, it was very civilized over drinking. Um, and yeah, I just kind of, so I think I saw this somehow. I made this connection that people are just nicer when they're drinking, or there's like the stress is lower, or you can let your guard down a little bit when there's alcohol. And of course, in my case, that's what turned out to be the case, right? My anxiety could be moderated and alleviated when I put substances in my body. So those were my learnings. Don't feel, and have a couple of drinks and everything's going to be okay.
Right. What was your relationship like with your mom? I know you had some events that
Yeah.
were challenging. What was that like for you?
Yeah. There just wasn't really, I never the interesting thing for me was I never really felt nurtured as a teenager. There was just no communication. She never knew what was going on. She never wanted to know. I just would get shut down if I'd get into trouble. I tried to commit suicide when I was 15, and
Oh, wow.
they took me home from the hospital, and the conversation was, "Are you okay now?" That was the extent of the conversation about me trying to off myself. And I said, of course, like I wanted to go out the next day or something. So I was like, yeah, I'm good. I'm good. And then my mom said, we love you, right? And I went, yeah, yeah. And then she left the room and I was like, oh my God, that is the first time my mother has ever said she loved me in my entire life. I didn't know.
Wow.
So that was interesting. And then I think what happened for me with my mom in the relationship was when I started having children, I saw her how she was with babies and little kids. And one day she said to me, she loved babies and little kids. And I didn't know that or really remember that. But over time, I began to have this felt sense of, yeah, and look at pictures and like she was like really into us when we were tiny and infants and toddlers and little cute kids. It was probably just when we started getting lippy and cheeky that she was like stood back from us, right? Not knowing how to interact with that. But for me, that did two things. It kind of, I went, oh, she did love me when I was little. And I mean, by the end of her life, I knew she loved me my whole life. But I
Right.
started even as a young woman thinking, oh, she did love me. And also came to understand that I probably experienced some sort of a rejection that would have gone from her like really loving me the way I see her love all these other kids in our life to me becoming like a preteen teen and like just going like, oh my God, I can't deal with this, and rejecting me. So that was good too, explored that a lot in therapy. So I probably had some great awarenesses about my mom,
Mhm.
but then rejection. What happened for me was in recovery. I don't know if anybody can relate to this, but you get to that point where I was doing step work and I had to do an amends. And it was time to do the amends to my mom. And I went out to her house to do the amends and I started talking, explaining to her like what amends were. And she just, before I even really, I said, this is what it is. And she says, okay, well, just so you know, before you even get started, I have forgiven you for absolutely everything, except for when you ran away to the Yukon and took my daughter with you without telling me. I will never, ever forgive you for that. And I was like, yeah, well, okay, well, that was kind of what I was here to talk about. So maybe we'll try this again down the road.
Wow.
And then, I mean, the continuation of that story is when as I stayed in recovery, we had deeper and more meaningful conversations. I came to understand her deep love for me and all the ways she wasn't able to show it. She was able to express it in ways that she'd never been able to show it before. And when she was terminally ill, I was probably the person that was there for her the most in terms of talking about her emotions and how things were going.
Mhm.
And we got so very close. That we honestly, when my mom passed away, there was nothing left unsaid on my side. And I don't think anything left unsaid on hers either. And that was a beautiful, beautiful gift for sure.
Yeah, that is a beautiful gift. I'm glad you had 16 months to sort of,
I know.
that's a significant amount of time to process.
I know, honey. And I know you didn't have that. And I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Ooh, well, take
I
a little
know.
breath there. Yeah, it was, yeah, with my mom, it was 22 days.
I know. I can't even.
Yeah, that was us. But I think we share a lot of commonalities with mom and really loving mom and having such a it's a complex relationship. Like I love my mom dearly, but she wasn't the mom I wanted her to be when I was little. Like maybe I think, what you were talking about your mom loving you when you were little, like I get that. Like I have all the pictures. I know she was super into it when we were little, but it was like, and I have kids, so they went through those stages where they were challenging. And I go, oh, this must have been what it was like for my mom. She was actually behaving in response to me and she didn't know how to respond.
Yeah.
Right. And I sort of have this background awareness. It's like, she's gone now and I don't want to betray her in any way. But the reality is that I didn't get what I needed
Yeah.
when I needed it the most. And
Yeah.
and I used to joke around with her. I don't know if I said this to her directly. I don't know if she heard me say it, but I would tell my boys, I go, that sweet little old lady who comes over here, that is not the bitch that raised me.
Right. Yeah.
Because she changed
Yes.
dramatically.
Yeah.
Like we all evolve, right? And she
Yeah.
was very positive and She had a near-death experience with a benign brain tumor when I was, 23 years ago when I was pregnant with my son. And it changed her dramatically. She was like
Right.
completely in denial of anything negative. So the last, 23 years of her life, she was like the most positive person anyone
Wow.
had ever met. Yeah, it was
Right.
amazing. But so then you have like these dual feelings at the same time. So it's very conflicting. And
Yeah. You have to find a place for them, right? Therapists, thank God for therapy. Because I still, even now, like I'm still exploring one in therapy, which has always been a part of my patchwork. And we'll get to something that, I mean, it just goes back to a core wound, like a core
Mhm.
issue. And like, I'm like, oh God, I don't want to go there again. Like, I don't want to feel that. I don't want to go back and be 5 and feel what that felt like,
Yeah.
or relate what this feels like to what that must have felt like, or understand that this is happening. This happened. Like, part of me is like, give the woman a break. She's
Yeah.
been dead for 23 years.
Right. Right.
But yeah,
Yeah, but it's not about who they were at the end. It's who
yeah,
they were and who we were in the beginning.
yes,
And, we can still look at it with and provide them with grace and dignity and realize they were just human, just like we were. Cause, we're moms.
I
We
know.
made plenty of mistakes with our kids,
Yes. And
but
I love, I mean, my kids, and I tell them this all the time. Taryn's new at it. She's just 3 months, but my oldest daughter, she's like the most amazing mom I've ever witnessed in my life. And I say
wow.
all the time, you must be doing it to make up for something I didn't do because you're just so over the top great at it. She
Wow.
laughs and says, no, you were fine.
Fine.
You were fine.
Fine. That's not a gold star.
She works.
Yeah, no,
I'll
that's
take a
sweet.
fine.
Yeah.
I'll take a fine.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's sweet. That's great that you can see that in her and share that with her. Um, yeah, processing grief is really hard, but is that something let's go back to your story a little bit because I do want to
Yeah,
know how,
right.
you eventually made peace. But how old were you when you started using?
15, kind of
Young.
late. I
Yeah.
think, might have pretended to use a few times when I was 14, but I was 15 the first time I felt the effects of a substance, I guess. And I maybe used it at 14, but when I was 15, I got drunk for the first time and blacked out.
Wow.
Um, and yeah, then just started kind of that began. And I left home when I was 16. I ran away when I was 16 and I ended up in, as runaways do, kind of in situations with older people who were doing living a more precarious lifestyle. And I just fell into that lifestyle. So from the time I was 16 till 20, when I got pregnant with my oldest daughter, I always feel like I packed in about 20 years of addiction into 4 because
Wow.
it was so intense and it was so dangerous and it was so full on. And then when I got pregnant, I decided, and I knew, by the time I was 17, even I was like, hi, I'm not good at this. This is not going to end well. I need to do something differently. Never knew what to do or never did anything differently. But when I got pregnant, I thought, okay, this is a chance to live, because if I don't choose this baby and doing what's right for this baby, I'm going to die. And that doesn't mean that, I didn't stop using. I certainly didn't stop drinking. I don't think I was smoking much pot back then. And I didn't do any hard drugs during that pregnancy, but I drank, and I drank to excess many times during that pregnancy. But that was the beginning of my trying to stop using.
Were you able to finish school?
No. So, well, I hadn't been, but before I got pregnant, when I was 19, always a little bit of a high achiever. I got my GED while I was bartending. So I would, kind of be bartending, and I would take all the shifts where I knew it would be slow so that I could sit at the bar and work on my GED. So I did get my GED. And when Ashley was born, and she was about 18 months old, I went to university, and I did a first year in the university as a single mom. There were all sorts of
Amazing.
opportunities for single moms to get an education where I lived. I went for a year. And at the end of that year, and I did really, really well, which surprised me. But at the end of that year, they gave me too much time off over the summer, and I fell back into addiction.
Mm.
And I ended up taking my student loan money and thinking I could just turn it into a really lucrative drug deal. And then I bought the drugs and did the drugs. So couldn't go back to school. Had a student loan that I, eventually had to pay back, but it was really a cocaine bill. Um, so I didn't go back to university until I got back into recovery. And then when I got into recovery in 1980, I went to treatment in 1987, smoked a lot of pot for 2 years. 1989, went back to treatment for pot, got off of that. And, it's kind of been pretty continuous since then. And I went back to university in 1991, 92, maybe. And I stayed for 13 years. 92, I went back.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So I did end up with an education.
You went all the way.
Yeah. Then I got addicted to school. I couldn't stop going to school. Plus, I
Yeah.
knew I'd have to start paying that student loan back.
But you got your PhD. That's amazing.
I did.
That's really incredible.
Yeah.
Tell me, what were your relationships with men like during that period of time?
That period, terrible.
The bad period.
The worst. There was, I had the opportunity to be in relationships with some really nice guys. I never took those opportunities. Never. And, when I go back and I think about so-and-so and so-and-so, I would have probably had an amazingly beautiful, healthy, happy life.
Peaceful,
right from the very beginning. Like from 16, the guy that I didn't wait, he went away for 6 weeks and I got involved with somebody else in the meantime. And it was the worst thing that ever happened to me, one of them.
Yeah.
And then again, different times where like, there were guys showing up who forever, whatever, I guess they were probably guys who thought they could save this messed up kid because I was pretty messed up, but I was cute too. I mean, there was that. But yeah, I could not engage with nice did not for me. They had to be assholes or I wasn't interested.
Yeah. I have a theory about why nice guys finish last. And I really feel like the outside, the people that we choose are a reflection of how we feel about ourselves.
Absolutely. 3000%. So I didn't have, right up until my first marriage with Karen's dad, he was a drug dealer. It was abusive. It ended. And then I was like, okay, I'm not getting in a relationship. It was an intense therapy over healing from domestic violence, of course. Came up with a list of what my list of like, my therapist said, I want a list of what you want in a relationship. And I came back with my homework the next week and it was all, he won't hit me. He won't push me. He won't call me this. He won't call me that. He won't, all the things that I wouldn't allow. And she said, okay, next week, I want you to come with a list of what you would like. And so, I just turned them all over, like, and then I fortunately for me, not too long into my recovery, I met a guy who met all the criteria on that list and continues to meet them pretty well and has for the last 30 some years.
We were talking about our husbands the other day, and I just feel like we are the two luckiest girls in the world that we just have such amazing men in our lives who take such good care of us.
And I know, so here's the thing, the oddly enough, the most successful, happiest couples I know in long-term marriages and relationships in my life, as it turns out, are couples that are both in recovery. Isn't that weird? Like I have so many, it's just, so that's pretty cool.
I got to tell you, the secret to our happiness is we both have the same goal, which is my happiness. I'm just kidding.
Actually, kidding. I have to think about that because that might be true.
Well, and here's the real answer though, is that, so we got together when I was 5 months sober, and they say not to get into a relationship your first year. And I understand
I was 3 weeks. No, but we didn't do anything we were just friends for 6 months.
Okay. Yeah. I get that. But so when we started dating, we were both working a program, right? And I had a sponsor and a support system. And I had this lady that Bobby and I would get into a fight, and I'd go to this lady and I'd be like, Julie, Bobby's doing this and he's doing that, blah, blah, blah. And she'd listen. And then she'd say, well, I don't sponsor him, so we're going to look at your part. I was like, oh, you bitch. So rude. But she would talk to me until I was able to get to a place of empathy for how my behavior affected him.
Yeah.
And that was magical, because then I could go to him, in all humility and be like, I see how my behavior must have affected you. Meanwhile, he's doing the same thing with the fellas. And I have a feeling they weren't as nice to him as Julie was to me.
Yeah.
Right. She's very gentle and empathetic. And and the guys are kind of ass kickers. But that was really, we had a process of resolving resentment and taking personal responsibility.
Totally. And we did too. And we also had a commitment that we were in this relationship and we were going to take things slowly. And if the relationship ever started taking too much energy or work, that we would prioritize our recovery and give up the relationship.
Wow.
And I mean that, so yeah. And maybe that's still true.
Yeah.
For us.
Well, the personal responsibility piece is super important, and that begins with self-care.
Yeah.
So that's amazing. That's a long time. I realize that we only have a little bit of time, and I could literally talk to you all day. There's a couple of, so anyway, you got sober, you got into healthy relationships, and here we are. Tell me, I do want to talk a little bit about, very briefly, like what She Recovers is, but I want to hear the origin story, like what happened, because it has absolutely taken off. And I feel like it fills a need for, I think you and I were discussing about these high achieving women. There needed to be a different kind of place for more people. So as much as
and I would say not just for high achieving women. I think it resonates for high achieving women, but throughout all my recovery, I just loved 12-step recovery. And I would love people that I met in 12-step recovery, and they maybe didn't love 12-step recovery and they would leave. And I would witness that three different things. Sometimes they would leave dejected and shamed, felt ashamed because they hadn't been able to stop using or whatever it was. And they would go out and they would continue to use, and some of them died. And that struck me as like, oh, I wish they'd stayed. And others would go and they'd be out and they'd be doing okay, but they'd be struggling. And I, would think, gee, I wish they had somewhere they could go like this, where they felt comfortable, like it's not here. And I get that. But I wish there was a place that they could continue to work on their recovery. And I didn't feel like that. I didn't know that place existed, other than they would maybe go into a yoga community or some other type of community where they were supported, but it wasn't like with a focus on recovery. And then the other thing I was noticing was that there were women who were leaving the program that I was in and so attached to, and they were thriving. And, they were doing it because they were in a meditation group and they were still focusing on the work of recovery. They were just, and in communities that focused on maybe meditation and mindfulness, or maybe other aspects of recovery, spirituality, etc. So they were thriving. And I just thought, oh, that's so cool. And so I was always open to the idea that there's more than just 12-step recovery, which was in opposition to what some of the people around me felt, right?
I know.
Like it's here. I was listening actually to a podcast that Laura McCowan was on with Sarah Hapola this morning, and they were talking about it very, very beautifully about AA
respectfully
programs.
Yeah,
very respectfully. It was awesome. I love that when I hear that.
Yeah, me too.
But they were joking about how in AA, if anything comes up for you that's wrong, the people around you just say, well, you just need more AA. It's like, you're struggling with something really serious, so you just need more meetings, more AA. When maybe it's a life-threatening eating disorder, more AA isn't going to cut it. So that was, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
So again, can I just
interject that even in the literature, it says to seek outside help.
I know.
So if it's, and I want to make the distinction, this is like, I'm constantly beating this drum of making the distinction between the program, which is in the book, and the fellowship that these are a group of people I love, but let's be real. It is not the hotbed of mental health. There's a lot of mental illness. Right. So it's always important to kind of keep that into perspective, that a few people's opinions they don't represent the whole of AA. That is in the literature and in the pamphlets and books.
Yeah.
So,
and it's, I liken it to the Bible. It's open to interpret, like these texts, these sacred texts are open to interpretation, and they've been misinterpreted a lot.
Yeah.
If you get back to the actual what's really been written,
right.
Some of it's still problematic. We can't get away from that.
Agreed. Yeah.
But really the spirit and the principles underlying it are sound.
Yes.
So anyway, all that to say that, well, I didn't need any other place, but then I drifted away from the program when I was in school. My mom got sick, all these other things were going on. And when I next needed a recovery support system was in 2011 when I hit the wall with workaholism.
Yeah.
And I knew that I could go back to NA and I would get fellowship but I couldn't go there and talk about my workaholism because that would be an outside issue. So I did look up workaholicsanonymous.org, which I loved. I love still. I've never been to a meeting, but I love their literature. It's fantastic. I love their website. And I just started to dream about a place that I could bring all of my things to, and none of it would be an outside issue. And I started a blog called Recovering Dawn and started having this conversation in cyberspace and started to resonate. And then my daughter and I started to do retreats for people recovering in any area of their lives. And again, mostly because the word recovery resonates mostly for people in substance use recovery, addiction recovery. The people who were then and are now most drawn to She Recovers are people who are in recovery from substance use. So 85% probably come to us that way. But we also get to talk about being in recovery from an eating disorder and from trauma and from love addiction and from workaholism, codependency, all the things, and not all, and all the things, including people can come and talk about being in recovery from racism and oppression and other like much more serious
Divorce,
issues than and divorce and death
cancer.
and
Yeah.
cancer and chronic illness and MS and all of that. So that's kind of what happened. Is this conversation evolved into a platform, which was for the first 10 years or 7 or 8 years about in-person events, conferences. It was a business. So it was conferences and retreats and ways that we could make money. And then the pandemic happened and we pivoted to online and we switched over to become a nonprofit. And now it's still all about how to raise money, but it's about how to raise money to help more people for free is really what She Recovers is about now. So, and not everything we do is free because we have to have events that cost money in order to raise money to do the things that are free.
Right.
But the goal is to continue to raise money so that more of what we offer is more accessible and free. And now we have online meetings every day, online meetings on the weekend for identity-based groups such as BIWOC and LGBTQ+, healthcare allied professionals, etc. We have in-person sharing circles that are free in a growing number of communities across North America and beyond. And we've just started our new chapter system. So we have a couple of brand new chapters, one in New England and one on Long Island, which will really be about creating energy and activity in communities around the She Recovers ethos, I suppose, kind of creating this conversation where people can come regardless of whether they're already identified with another recovery pathway. I mean, we're an umbrella. We are not set up like some other recovery platforms are set up as an alternative to 12-step recovery. We very specifically are not an alternative. We are an and, not an or. So we welcome, and I'd say probably 40% of the people in our community have either identify as a strong member of a 12-step community, have been in the past, or remain open to the idea of exploring it in the future.
I think what I really love is, attitudes come from the top down. And I think you've just done an amazing job at asking people to be respectful because people are so passionate one way or the other about 12-step. And I get it because, you talked about watching people die, right? And you and I share that experience. I've been in 12-step for 29 years this month, and I've seen people die. And so it's alarming. And we do have this tendency to think that one way is the only way. It's a very religious type of mentality. And there is some religious tones to it. They're not even undertones. It's pretty overt. Yeah. But I grew up in a household where that was acceptable. So it felt familiar to me and it worked for me for a lot of reasons. But I love your attitude. You and Taryn have done such an amazing job of allowing people to have their opinions, but you ask that people do it in a respectful way.
Well, we ask that people speak from their experience and that they speak about their experience as just that, their sole experience, right? Yeah. So that in our community, if somebody's saying like, oh, geez, I'm really lonely. How do I find community and recovery? Somebody says, I go to AA. somebody else might, and then somebody might see that and go, well, I went to AA and I hated it. It was a cult and it was a shaming and it was, and we'll just very kindly say, we'd come on like in front of everybody and say,
Yeah.
would you consider reframing that?
Yeah.
Sharing from our own personal experience is one thing, but making blanket observations or judgments against a program based on our singular experience isn't really fair.
Right.
And, if the person kind of, sometimes like, oh yeah, you're right. And sometimes they just buckle down. And
Yeah.
like, we're a no bash zone. We don't bash. Now, do we critique? Yes. Did I write a piece called Dear Women in 12-Step Recovery? It talks about how we can do better. Like, I think, that first of all, not everybody has to go to 12-step recovery. I just don't believe that. It's not going to work for everybody. It works even less for women in many regards, but we need to look at it realistically. It's the freest, most available, most diverse. It's available in like hundreds of different languages, 12-step, the NAA, all of the different anonymous literature. And it's free and on just about every corner of every major center in North America and across the world. So we can't deny people an opportunity to check that out. I just think people need to check it out if they're interested, and that they should be able to do that without thinking because somebody somewhere said it's a cult and it's horrible and the entire basis in the program is X, Y, and Z.
Right.
I think that that's unfair. So I just always have to remind people that I'm the founder of She Recovers. 12-step recovery saved my life. I will not tolerate it being bashed. That doesn't mean that we can't respectfully critique things that we can do better. But I even don't think, I don't think it's very helpful. And I think it's a waste of energy for people who aren't involved in AA to critique it from the outside. So what? You're not involved. You know where the power is? It's those of us who are in it and love it.
Yeah.
We can be the people that try and affect change, by talking to people in the program about the things that are outrageous and that can be done better so that more women find comfort in that program. So that's where I prefer to direct my energy, is not arguing on one side or the other, but transforming systems from within, because that's where change happens.
So you and I are both writing books that are sort of our love letters to 12-step. And tell me the premise of this next. Okay, so we talked a little bit about your book. Right. I'm going to leave a link to it. I'm actually in it. You named me. It was so funny because it was all about, I wrote something for the, I wrote something for She Recovers blog about a lesson. It was actually a lesson that I learned after losing my mom about, my whole life was based on trying to make my mom proud, right? It was external validation. It's achievement junkie. It's workaholism. It's all those things, rescuing people. Cause I had an older sister and then, so I had these amazing lessons and I wrote about it. And November 6th was when you talked about my friend Arlena Allen. I was like, oh my God, I was 10 kinds of high after I read that. But anyway, it was, and then I had to laugh because it was all about validation. And I was like, I feel so validated right now.
well, this book it's not my love letter to 12-step recovery. It's my love letter to recovery.
Yeah. So
I'll tell you about my new book is something different, but
yes. I'm sorry. I don't mean to confuse everyone.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
But this book is,
yes.
The reason your voice is in it is because I wanted to say something about internal validation. And like you said it better than I ever could. So the book itself is a patchwork of other women's voices, like other women in recovery voices. A lot of my thoughts, obviously, but I share a lot of what I've learned from other people, and I name people in. So this is a daily reader.
The daily reader, She Recovers
for everybody.
Yes.
In recovery. It's published by Hazelden. They wanted something kind of like a companion to Each Day a New Beginning, which is a 40-year-old Hazelden meditation book for women. It's Each Day a New Beginning is very much about alcohol, and it's very much about 12-step recovery. And of course, my book is about more than just alcohol, about all the things we're in recovery from. And it's about all the ways. Yeah. Not just 12-step.
Not just 12-step, but and then you and I were talking about your next book project. Right. Tell me a little bit about that project.
So the next book, the working title is She Recovers, Reimagining a 12-Step Healing Process for Women. And it draws from the 12 steps, and it talks about, and it draws from and borrows some of the principles from 12-step recovery. but it also has some that are not necessarily, or revisits some of them. Like you won't find a chapter on humility, because I understand that humility for me is meaning that I need to be teachable, but I think the word is too triggering for women who have been lived in their addiction, live a life of humiliation.
Right.
And I think it's hard to get past that for them. So there might be a principle in there that is about curiosity and remaining curious and teachable. And I
Yeah.
will refer to, in some parts of the world, you could even, like I would then say, in 12-step recovery, this is related to the principle of humility. But
Right.
I'm not starting with humility. So it's sometimes there's some new principles, there's some revisiting, there's some re-explanation, and then for each of the 12 practices, I mean, the principles and practices, they're big set out as practices. But for each of them, I talk specifically to, like, if you're brand new to recovery from whatever it is, and then as you go through your recovery, and then like kind of how, because so part of the book is talking about the developmental phases of recovery and how we go
So good.
from desperation to thinking about the stages of change, right?
Right.
In a way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's fun. Right now it's mostly in pictures because I have to diagram things out before I can actually start writing them. And now the diagrams are kind of all over the place, but I'm getting close. I'll soon start writing. I've started a little bit of writing, but I'll soon sit down and actually write it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think it's so needed. You had actually helped me reframe the title of my book project. It was started out as the 12-step survival guide.
Right.
And you're like, can we reframe that? I don't remember how you put it, but it was really, so now it's the exploration guide, how to navigate safely.
Yeah.
And my whole thing is context and perspective to ideas that are kind of confusing, because my position is that the 12 steps are a worthy endeavor.
Yeah.
And that we just need a little context and perspective to some of the ideas that are challenging. I see some of the ideas as obstacles. And if we can get around those obstacles with a different lens, then we can continue to make forward progress to finish that exercise, the 12-step exercise, which I think it was such a transformational experience for me personally, and for so many people I know. But I'm aware that I was like, what's the difference between people like you and I who are able to get all the way through, and the difference between people who came up against some issues and were not able to get past it, and they pull the ripcord and left?
Yeah. Well, it's their personal experience is what it was. It's their outlook, their life view, it's all of those things we don't really know.
Yeah, there's so many variables.
Yeah. Did they have a unfortunate experience with religion? So the God word, they just can't get past that. And let's be clear. Sometimes it's a class issue.
Yeah.
And we can't divorce the issue of privilege when we talk about accessing recovery platforms. I know women who are like, I'm not going to those places because I am not like those people.
Right.
And we want to be able to relate, right? So I mean, like even when I got into recovery, I remember thinking like, I'm not that bad. And did that keep me away? No, because I was just bad enough. I was not that bad, but I was bad enough that I needed to be somewhere and there was nowhere else to go.
Right.
And so it didn't. But yeah, if you're somebody who's like literally never even, if you're sitting beside somebody who is an IV drug user and you're seeking out recovery because you blacked out once, and I've met it's like, if you're not going to relate, you're not going to stay. And so I do think it can be a class issue, but it can also just be if it doesn't resonate and it doesn't make sense to you, you're not going to stay. But I also think what I've seen and witnessed and observed probably is that a lot of people they come into 12-step recovery or any other area and they're not really ready to give it up completely. And 12-step recovery for subs like AA, and it's an abstinence-based program. So they don't belong there because they're not there yet. They're not there on the stages of change. So if they can come to a community like She Recovers and just talk about, maybe they're just moderating substances, that we don't care. We don't talk a lot about substances. We're talking about what's going on with your life.
Right. Yeah.
But they get to a place where they're ready for abstinence. Maybe then they go, and then they're ready, and then they stay. And maybe not. Maybe they, they find what they need where they already are, and She Recovers. But I have seen people come in because they're never going to those meetings. They hate those meetings. They've never been to one, but they hate them and they're not going. And that's okay. I mean, I get it. They've heard
Yeah.
all the horror stories and none of the
Yeah.
good stories.
Yeah.
And so they're never going there. And then after a while, they realize these virtual meetings are okay, but they are not going to have a sharing circle in their town because there's only 300 people. And
Yeah.
they want or 500 people, and they want some in-person connection. So they've been sober now for a year or 2 or even 3, and they're going to check out a meeting because they're looking for other people who have a similar lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I've met women who then go and check out their local AA group or women's group, if there is one, and they love it.
Yeah.
And they now have the confidence to go into those meetings. And when they get told what they have to do by that old timer who thinks she has the right to tell you how to live your life, when she doesn't.
There's always one in
right?
every meeting.
Yeah, then the woman with some confidence can say, well, thank you for your suggestion, but as I understand it, it's only a suggestion and there are no musts, and the only requirement is the desire to stop using. And I've had that, and I haven't drank for 3 weeks. So sit down. I'll be back next week, but you don't need to tell me what to do. I'm okay.
Yeah. Yeah. You're not the boss of me.
You're not the boss of me. I mean, that's really what I wish that, I think when we hand out pamphlets in 12-step meetings, they should come along with the only requirement, like really emphasize the only requirement is, because we don't emphasize that enough.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you, I want to be respectful of your time, but I do want to touch on the importance of how the landscape is changing so much, because there's MAT, medical assisted therapy. Do I have that right? Treatment. I keep saying therapy, treatment, medical assisted treatment. So that's now a thing. And things like Suboxone, Vivitrol, psych meds. And I recently had a discussion with somebody who said, mistakenly, AA believes in abstinence, including, and I was like, that's not what it says. There's actually a pamphlet that you can download for free on aa.org that talks about AA doesn't actually have a position other than be careful and talk to your doctor. And here's some stories about people who were told by AA members not to take medication with tragic results. Here are some people that did take medication with tragic results. It really just depends. How do you see that playing out in the broader recovery community?
Well, with regard to prescription, like prescribed drugs, I've been around long enough to remember, like when Prozac first kind of came on the scene 30 years ago, about 30 some years ago, and there was an uproar in 12-step recovery communities because people were being put on Prozac, and everybody around them was saying, you just broke your clean time or your sobriety.
You're not sober.
And it was horrible. And, my husband, he'd had cancer, and he was in a deep depression. It was physical, it was chemical.
Right.
And his doctor put him on Prozac. And I was like, I'm so upset with you for saying yes to that. Like, that was me saying, no, this is not going to fly. He luckily he was confident enough to say, back down, none of your business. I'm doing
Settle down.
He was on it for 6 months. Whatever it did, it helped his chemistry. He's never been on again. So it was so, I mean, the same thing was with NA beer. Like, it was just all this drama that still goes on today, which is such a surprise to me that it's still happening.
Yeah.
So there was that. You know what? I think that nobody in any 12-step program has, even if they are a doctor, unless you're a person's doctor, you have no right to judge when something else is being prescribed for them. Does that mean that if you're new to recovery and you've been addicted to opioids and you're going on a painkiller, that you shouldn't be really careful and involve your sponsor and your partner in helping you to manage having to take those meds? Of course, I think you can set up all sorts of safety nets for yourself. And I think that that's a really good idea. Nobody else gets to say what you can take. I think with Matt, it's more complicated. But I can only have my own personal opinion. And I think that Suboxone saves lives.
Yeah.
It saves lives. And and I would like come along and be a part of our community. We have no judgment around that. The fact of the matter is that in NA, there is massive judgment around
Yeah.
that. And what does that mean? That means people aren't going to feel comfortable. They're going to feel shamed, and they're not going to be successful, either successful by they're not going to stay, or successful in continuing to take care of themselves
Or
with this
staying
life-saving
alive.
medication.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Stay
I'm
alive.
I'm all for all of those things. Similarly, I think we were talking about, like, my daughter Taryn has done ayahuasca.
The psychedelic.
I'll never do it. I will never in my entire life do ayahuasca. No interest whatsoever. Think it's crazy. I don't. I mean, for me, like, I was like, why would I ever want to
All
throw
right.
up on like
Yeah.
do something that I know is going to make me throw up? I'm not going to do
Yeah.
it.
Or worse.
It changed her life. It
Yeah.
changed her life. It
Yeah.
transformed her spirit. I
Yeah.
see that. I witnessed that. I think more people should probably do ayahuasca. I'm not going to do it.
Yeah. But
So I just think
there's other substances that aren't quite like ayahuasca. Those are the big guns. Ayahuasca is like the heavy, but there's other
there's
things like
psilocybin, like
psilocybin.
microdosing. Again, I've seen incredible results in people who have microdosed. Incredible. Like, people that I've never seen any kind of improvement in certain mental health conditions improve.
Yeah.
Who am I to say? Like, who am I to say, no, you shouldn't do that, because
Right.
somehow my expectation that you never take any substances that are psychoactive overpowers your well-being. I mean, it's none of my business. Does
Right.
AA and does NA do AA and NA have to figure out for themselves what that means? Yeah, but as a member of those of a program, you're welcome in my meetings. You're welcome to sit beside me. I'll talk to you and I'll support you. I won't
Yeah.
judge you.
Yeah.
That's me.
I've interviewed so many people now who have done psychedelic assisted therapies, and that ranges from DMT to ketamine, MDMA, psilocybin, LSD, and ayahuasca. And the transformational, I feel like that's the Prozac of our age.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
we're at the like
exactly.
20, 30 years from now, we're going to look back at some of these limiting ideas and judgmental attitudes that are going to be like, oh, we just didn't know. We didn't have enough evidence. We didn't have the data. But there's clinical trial, like Johns Hopkins is doing all these clinical trials on psilocybin, and
Absolutely. I mean,
it's
this is
saving
science.
people.
It's science, right? And
Yeah.
I think 12-step recovery sometimes has to do a little, like, as not as a program, because it's not set up as this, but as individuals in 12-step, we have a responsibility to have a greater understanding of some of the things that are profoundly influencing our understanding of addiction.
Right.
If you are a member of a 12-step recovery program and you don't understand the role of trauma and addiction and the relationship, do some reading, because you need to understand that. And it provides a lot of answers for why a lot of people don't stay in 12-step recovery programs too, right? I mean, there is that piece too.
Oh, that's huge. Unresolved trauma takes more
Yeah.
people out than anything else.
Yeah.
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 Well, there's so much to be said about this, but I appreciate your openness and your attitude towards, all these emerging, treatments really for people that are in addiction, and how you all have created such a safe place for so many people that just don't fit in anywhere else.
Well, and I want to say that now that we've done this, and now that we've become known for this, I think we're at a place where the She Recovers Foundation really wants to focus on helping to dissolve the binary, the dichotomy, the polarization of 12-step versus non-12-step. I think we're respected enough in the space to start having that conversation with more people about 12-step is never going to be for everybody, and that's okay.
And that's okay.
Two things need to happen. People who say it's not for them or don't think it's for others need to stop saying it's not for others, because they don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And people in 12-step recovery have to stop saying, this is the way, thou shalt follow this path, because that's not true either. And again,
the only way.
that means transformation from within those programs.
Yeah.
And some education of the people outside of those programs who are making they're making informed decisions about the viability and the possibility of those programs for themselves.
Right.
That doesn't translate into for anybody else.
Well
for
said.
everybody else.
Right. Well said. Well, Dawn, it's always a pleasure to spend time with you. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and all
Thank
your
you.
gifts. And on
Do
behalf
you,
of so many women who love you, thank you so much for all the work that
hey,
you're doing.
I have to ask you, so you're
What?
like one day at a time group.
Yeah.
Do they identify like as a one day at a time group? Like the people as individuals? Like, do they get together and do things as,
Well, we do have a 12-step meeting on Saturday mornings,
right,
and I do facilitate a free 12-step workshop.
right,
And I
yeah,
have taken them on retreat. But like you said, that's a lot of work.
right, yeah.
I
Well,
do all my stuff is for free except for my hypnosis coaching.
I know, yeah, I love it. Anyway, I would love to meet more of your community members because it's a great group.
Yeah,
Maybe
thank you.
some, maybe some in the Chicago area or not
Oh
too
yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
become
I have a group of girls going, of women that are
awesome.
going. So we'll
Great.
definitely have a little meeting there too.
Yeah,
But thank you so much for this time together. And I'll look forward to seeing you in Chicago, but I'll talk to you before then.
you will for sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's great.